So a very, very good morning to all of you who are here live on the Zoom, and for those of you watching on YouTube later, then good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And today we start a series of talks, no idea how long it will go on, but over this summer in the Northern Hemisphere. And we'll be looking into Mipam Rinpoche's text, penetrating or entering the ways of the wise. So let's start. Let's start in the very, very best way. It's often said that when we start something, we should make a special effort because the first oomph, the first impetus, very often determines colors, determines shapes, the way things will be afterwards. So the idea is to have a wonderful motivation for being here today and to have a heart full of love for all of our fellow beings, every single sentient being. To feel that we're here to learn for them so that we can become more peaceful, wiser, more kind, loving, compassionate, so that we can really help more and more people. Like Buddha did. So many millions, billions of people helped by what Buddha did. One person. And the impact, result, consequences of what Buddha did with his mind, with his lives, benefited billions upon billions of people in his lifetime and ever since. It's amazing. So that's our inspiration. And in great hopefulness, optimism, that's the word I was looking for, then we are baby bodhisattvas and we are on this path where we're going to do what Buddha did. That's really the motivation we're looking now. You believe it. You're really going to do it. And I hope you'll get there before I do. That's the idea. That's the idea behind these prayers. So let's do them. We take refuge in the Buddha, in the Dharma, and in the community of most noble minds. From this moment on, until we reach the very heart of enlightenment. Through the practice of generosity and all 6 transcendent virtues, may we reach total awakening and every enlightened quality to be able to truly help sentient beings so lost in samsara. May each and every being be well, live long, be healthy, be well provided for. May they have good friends, find respect. May they live in places of peace and plenty. Most of all, may they practice Dharma. May they each create the causes for these good circumstances to be their wealth in future lives, and may they be free from suffering and from creating causes of future suffering. May they discover the natural, sacred well-being, totally beyond suffering, and attain the great equanimity that is free of closeness or distance from anyone. Deyata shame shamawati shameta shadru Om kore mare jite karote ke yorite jovati oloyane Peshudane male malapanaye kukure kaka grase. Grasana omuke paramuke amuke shamme dawane. Sawa graha bandhanane negrehetva sawa bhava pravadena. Vimukta marapasha savitva bhutamudra. Annudgatita sava mare putsarita parishuddhe. Pika shantu sava maraka. Glorious Guru, source of all blessing, ever present above our head on lotus and moon seat, through your immense kindness ever sustain us, that the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind flow from you, and we are one. As I was mentioning before the talk started, this particular series of teachings I'm going to try and do traditionally. And we had a sort of a one-off chapter from further on in the text that I didn't do traditionally. I did it how I enjoyed doing it, just for kind of fun and as a taster, as a teaser for the course. But I think it will be nice now. Many of us have spent many weeks, months, even a couple of years together to have a taste of studying it very much how I studied it myself, formally from my teachers, exactly the way they studied it with their teachers, and going back. So I hope that's interesting and not too boring. We shall see as time goes by, and your feedback, of course, is always welcome. So the idea when there's a new teaching is always to zoom into it. That means to put it into context. So, and then afterwards to talk about the author of this particular teaching and the particular qualities of the text. So in general, we are looking at Abhidharma. Abhidharma is traditionally, looking back from where we are, one of the three main areas of Buddha's teaching. Sutra, Vinaya, Abhidharma, called often the three baskets or the Tripitaka, three collections of teachings. And it's true that Buddha taught them all. And as we saw in recent months when we looked at Dharma as a refuge, although Buddha taught them all, Abhidharma is something which, as a philosophy, as the Buddhist science of mind and matter, although the Buddha taught the key elements, it didn't evolve into a science, into a philosophy, into something much written about, much commented on, until at least 300 years after the Buddha. So really, we looked at that topic a little bit in the previous courses. So I want to make it as short as possible now. The Buddha taught, and the first thing you need to understand about the Buddha is we only have a bit of what he taught. We have the essential, but he taught for 45 years, and he taught some of the most brilliant people who were reincarnated as his disciple. So if you'd had the experience that I've had of traveling with wonderful lamas, great teachers, then when you see what happens in public and in private, and especially in private when they're guiding individuals, you realize that what's publicly known, published, and so on, is just a fraction of what goes on. And in fact, the really juicy bit, the really interesting bits, is when they are guiding people in their practice and answering their questions. Because people come up with all sorts of amazing questions. Some people have quite original minds, and their questions are quite interesting, challenging. And many lamas say children's questions are sometimes the very best because they're uninhibited and they just say it as they think it. And often grown-ups don't dare ask such, how can you say, obvious questions. But anyway, so the Buddha must have taught so much. And he was available all the time for this wonderful Sangha that either they were brilliant when they came to him, they had past life stories that were amazing, like his main disciples, or once they'd spent some years with him and practicing and becoming arhats and so on. They had beautiful hearts, wonderful minds, and so on. So what we have are whatever was remembered of the Buddha's public discourses on the main topics. We have a fraction. So that's one thing I think, very important to realize. And when we looked at the Dharma as a topic a few weeks ago, then we saw about the first council and already the tensions that were there between parts of the Sangha, and how what we have as the outcome of the first council, even indeed if the first council ever happened, is limited. And there was already a lot more. But at the time of Buddha, people didn't write. No writing, everything learned by heart. So when it came to the more technical, so what the Buddha taught and what was taught for the few centuries after the Buddha until writing came on stream was mainly sutra and Vinaya. Vinaya is mainly about precepts, conduct. It's about two areas of our activity. It's about morality, it's about ethics, it's about integrity. It's about living up to the highest part of ourself rather than being pulled down by the lower parts of ourselves. So it's in two areas. One is public, how we relate to other sentient beings, and learning not to harm with body, speech, and mind. And so there's that aspect of Vinaya, but then the same for ourselves, not to harm ourselves with our thoughts, with our way we use our speech. I mean, normally we speak to other people, but I think most of us also speak when we're on our own. And we can curse and swear or praise and say things. And, we have habits we express. And then, our mind and our body, how to behave ethically with our body, so that we nurture good habits and we reduce the bad habits. So Vinaya is about that, absolutely fundamental, basic, important for all Buddhists, and very central in Buddhist practice in those first centuries after the Buddha. But then, so then Buddha himself summed up his teachings. He says, all my teachings is three things: not to harm others, to create virtue in oneself, and to master one's mind. So the Vinaya is very much about not harming others, creating virtue in oneself. But then Sutra, the second basket, Vinaya Sutra, is about mastering one's mind. It's about meditation. And in those first centuries, of course, people were meditating a lot. And they do seem to have done very well with just those two main baskets, leading a very moral, ethical life of integrity, and meditating to master the mind. In order to help them understand and master the mind, for instance, practice the four foundations that are mindfulness. At the beginning, all of our Buddhist path is mindfulness. Then when you come to mindfulness of body, mindfulness of mind, and so on, then we use the Buddha's analysis of body and mind that was later developed as Abhidharma. But at the beginning, they had simple lists because everything was learnt by heart. No books, no texts, and many things learnt in verse, so you could remember easily. Verse is an easy way to remember. So they had lists. These lists were called matrikas. And an interesting word, matrik, is the root of our word matrix, matrice in French. And so these were key lists of different things. One of the main lists that everyone learned, for instance, was the 37 factors of enlightenment. As we go on the path to enlightenment, there are 5 main stages of the path. And so, depending where you are on the path, then in the first stage of the path, you have 4 plus 4 plus 4 factors, tools, means tools that you use. The 4 foundations of mindfulness are the first 4. Then the 4 great changes inside yourself and so on. So the list of the 37, they could rattle them off because they know them by heart. Because this kind of basic map you have in your mind, where you're going, what the different steps are, what you need, when. It's like you're going on a journey. I'm going to need a plastic raincoat when I get to that part. I'm going to need a stick to go up the hill. I'm going to need a few chocolate bars and an orange for when I get to the top of the mountain, and so on. We plan ahead. So these lists, matrikas, were what were there. And then writing came, and people could explore the Buddha's teaching with a piece of paper or a piece of tree bark or a bamboo leaf. And then once you can start writing things down, you can have it in front of you and think about it and start putting things together. And so they started putting things together. When it comes to karma, then Buddha said this about it here, in that discourse, he said that about it, and this one. Over 45 years, so many discourses that in themselves fill 100 volumes. The information about karma that the Buddha gave is just everywhere, bits and pieces. So then people could go through that text and write down this bit, and go through this text and write down those bits, and then, you've got everything the Buddha said on karma without learning 100 volumes of texts, so that you've got all the different references and contexts. And then the 37 factors of enlightenment, everything he said about this one there and that one there, bring it all together. And so then probably from about around 300 before the Common Era, whenever writing came in. And then for the next few hundred years, this slowly developed. It became accepted. People started writing their own summaries of the Buddha's teaching so that people could learn Buddhist theory. And we call that Abhidharma. Now, the word Abhidharma, Dharma is Dharma. We looked into that previously. It's a word with many meanings, Dharma, 10 meanings in Sanskrit. Its main meaning is things. And it's beautiful. What did Buddha teach? Things. Everything. Things as they are. The real truth about things. I mean, things includes people and beings too, not just inanimate objects. Everything that happens. So Dharma. And then the way Buddha taught it was true, was clear, was well organized. And so then that becomes the meaning of Dharma, the Buddha's teachings about things. So then Abhi that comes before it has two meanings in Sanskrit. One just means about the Dharma. And that was probably one of the original meanings, because there's a very early text which is called Abhivinaya, which are discourses on the Vinaya, on the vows. So it could have been just about the Dharma or the Dhammas that Buddha taught. But the other meaning of Abhi is means best or excellent, very good. It's like upgrade word, makes it super, a super look at the Dharma. And so anyway, Abhidharma texts started to emerge. And then if we go through some of the main ones, then there was the Abhidharma Vibhasha or Mahavibhasha, the great commentary on Abhidharma. And this probably had multiple authorship, but it became very, very popular. And here we're in the 1st century of our era, more or less. I think maybe even later. Yeah, maybe about the year 150 of our era. It made those texts, but in particular, this great commentary, the Mahavibhasha, made a huge difference to the Buddhist world. People who before had been practicing right conduct, Vinaya, meditating a lot, more and more became scholars. And scholastic institutions or scholasticism became part of monastic life. And it's so handy when you've got this, what the Buddha said about this and about that summed up, reproduced by somebody. So once somebody gets into the picture, then you've got somebody's understanding of what the Buddha said, somebody's preferences of what the Buddha said. Even if they try very hard, there's always the human input to the Buddha's original words. But so convenient. What's the choice? You study 100 volumes of the Buddha's teaching. And where do you get access to them? You can't carry them around with you. Or you learn them by heart, or you can't. I think in the greatest scholars, they only could recite half the Buddha's teachings by heart. It's enormous. It's a lot. But then you've got one book with an analysis of the Buddha's teachings about mind and about matter. So that Mahavibhasha, that major commentary, gave rise to an actual Buddhist school, one of the main Buddhist schools. So that's important. What's important for us happened, so it was about year 150, a few hundred years later, probably in the 4th, 5th century, where there were two brothers, Asanga and Vasubandhu. Asanga and Nagarjuna gave us all our Bodhisattva teachings. I mean, the Buddha gave them, but they really formulated them. All of our Bodhisattva Mahayana teachings go back to Nagarjuna and Asanga. Asanga's story is an amazing story. Not everyone agrees on it, but it's an amazing story. And he had a brother, Vasubandhu. So these were, in fact, half-brothers. Oh, it's such a lovely story. It's all about their mum, their life story. Their mum was a nun, and she was a nun, and she was brilliant, and she had, her previous lives were interesting, let's say. We don't have time to go back there. She was reborn a woman in a time when women didn't have much impact, unfortunately. And she really saw that some input was needed in the Buddhist world at that time. Some nice bringing things back to base, making things clearer and so on was needed. So she decided, I can't do it, I'm a woman, no one will listen to me. I can be a nun, but I'm not going to be an influencer, we'd say these days. So she decided she didn't decide, she had divine inspiration, she had a vision to have 2 children. She didn't want a husband, so she went and had one child with one guy who was of the warrior caste in India. And then she, a few years later, had another child with someone from the Brahmin caste. She didn't stay with the men at all. She needed them to make the babies. And then she brought up the children in Dharma, in retreat a lot of the time. Now, it's quite interesting because I had a friend, fortunately he's dead now, a Tibetan monk whose mother was a very famous Manipa. She led groups of 10,000 people in Tibet. And very often she lived in caves, and she brought up her son in a cave. And I worked with him all for a couple of years on Tibetan texts. He was a wonderful scholar. So anyway, I can imagine what it was like for Asanga and Vasubandhus, for them being brought up by their mother. So they became great scholars. They were in Kandahar, in the greater Kandahar, the Pakistan, Afghanistan region. And then they traveled into Kashmir, into India, and became great teachers. Vasubandhu became a great teacher of basic Buddhism, let's say what's now Theravada Buddhism, and he wrote a commentary to Abhidharma, which is called the Treasury of Abhidharma, Abhidharma Kosha. Later on in life, he met his brother and converted to his brother's views, so that was Asanga. And Asanga gave us a commentary, slightly different commentary on Abhidharma, called the Abhidharma Samuccaya. Abhidharma Kosha, Abhidharma Samuccaya are the main ones that our studies will go back to. Mipam Rinpoche mainly quotes those. What to mention, the very, very famous ones. Then a couple of hundred years after them, in Sri Lanka, then there was Buddhaghosa. Buddhaghosa wrote the Path of Purification, Magga, which is the most used Abhidharma text in the Theravada tradition. So anyway, Abhidharma with writing, and it took some time, if you've been following what I've said, from 300 years before our era until the great commentary. You've got what, 450 years before this great Abhidharma commentary arises. Then you've got another couple of hundred years before Asanga and Vasubandhu, and another 100 or more years before Visuddhimagga, Path of Purification. So Abhidharma became bigger and bigger, and then from about 500 in our era, Nalanda and these huge monastic universities developed, and Abhidharma was really very important, vastly studied, so that in the end, some 7 schools of Abhidharma emerged in India before Dharma was destroyed in India in the 12th century. So that's a brief look at history. As you can imagine, the actual history is immense. So we're just having a brief look at the history. So now, Abhidharma is quite extensive. We're going to study it through the work of Mipam Rinpoche. He's usually called Ju, J-U, Mipam, because Ju was his family clan in Tibet. He was an amazing mind of the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 1900s. 1846 to 1912. And he was absolutely brilliant. He was basically in the Nyingma tradition. One of his main teachers was Patrul Rinpoche. Many of you know Patrul Rinpoche, very famous Tibetan master. He wrote Words of My Perfect Teacher, and very respected by all the traditions. It was one of his main teachings, especially for the Bodhisattva teachings. And another one was Jambon Control. So anyway, he was a great mind. And what had happened in his tradition, in the Nyingma tradition, is they had never really been too scholarly a tradition. They had Longchenpa, of course, centuries before, but for their studies, their Dharma studies, they mainly used texts from other traditions, very often from Gelugpa traditions. And Mipam was an amazingly prolific writer. He produced texts on more or less everything. And his writings, they are amazing. They're amazing. If I've not seen many of them, but he sums things up clearly, precisely, beautifully, and you've got it. And he can take this topic and that topic, and he can give it to you in a couple of pages, all you really need to know. His texts are amazing, and so many of the teachers I know, if they want to think about something, give a talk about something, they'll very often pop into one of his texts because they're just so good. So anyway, one thing that he was also very good at in his text is bringing things together, 2 things that seem maybe in contradiction or in conflict, the absolute and the relative, and this view and that view, and he was very good at having a synthetic view of the whole, which showed the relative, the absolute, and so on. Very, very well known for that. He was already writing texts by the time he was 10 years old. In Tibet, very few people wrote Dharma texts. Normally you had to be quite a recognized scholar. Already he was so brilliant as a child that the earliest texts he wrote were at the age of 10. With others, he became part of, now it's hard to know what to call it, movement, the Rimé movement in Tibet. Now Rimé means non-sectarian. Unfortunately, Tibetan Buddhism was very sectarian. It's something that's not the happiest side of Tibetan Buddhism. We don't need to go there, but wars were fought over that kind of thing, unfortunately. And so they were scholars who wanted to learn from everybody and to see all the commonalities, and if there were differences, to understand the differences and to bring harmony, to bring friendship rather than conflict. So if we call it a Rimé movement, or some people call it the Rimé school, it's almost like a contradiction. You see, there's too many schools and sects that are different, so you make a new sect to have a synthetic view of all of them. Doesn't work. It wasn't at all in the spirit. They wanted not to make something, make a new movement. They wanted to get rid of something, which is bias and sectarianism, and think, I have to only be Nimapa, I have to only be Kaju, I have to only be Gelugpa. Or this monastery is Gelugpa, this monastery is Nimapa. Whereas in India, Nalanda and so on, people of all philosophical trends were together in the same place. Monasteries did not belong to traditions. So they were getting rid of the sectarianism and trying to really find the Buddha's teaching in a broad-minded way. So this Rimé movement was amazing, refreshing, revitalizing movement at the end of the 19th century. So he was part of that. And I think I sent you in the, before this course, a link to, there's a Wikipedia about Mipam Rinpoche, it's pretty good. So anyway, I just wanted to share with you, before we actually get into the text, two quotes from him, two things he said. Just not long before he died, he told this to his attendant. Nowadays, if you speak the truth, nobody wants to listen. If you speak lies, everyone thinks it's true. I've never said this before. I'm not an ordinary person. I'm a bodhisattva who has taken rebirth now in this body through aspiration. The suffering I'm experiencing in this body is just the remains, what's left of my karma. But from now on, I will never again have to experience karmic obscuration in rebirth. That's part of what he said. Then the next bit is a prophecy he gave, even closer to his death, to one of his students, khenpoken. So remember, this is in 1912, right? 1912. He died in 1912, so this is 1910, 1911. He's in Tibet. He's in eastern Tibet, quite a remote part of eastern Tibet, not really connected to the world at large. And this is what he says. Now I shall not remain long in this body. After my death, in a couple of years' time, war and darkness shall cover the earth. The First World War, which will have an effect even on this isolated snowland of Tibet. And in some 30 years from now, a mad storm of hatred will grow like a fierce black thundercloud in the land of China. And a further decade on, this evil shall spill over into Tibet itself, so that lamas, scholars, disciples, and yogis will come under terrible persecution. Due to the demon Peha taking power in China, darkness and terror will come to our sacred land, with the result that violent death shall spread like plague through every village. They will seize power in Tibet. There will be war, famine, and oppression. No one will be safe. But for me, very soon, my own mind stream will be gathered up in the pure land of Tushita, from whence many emanations shall come forth in future years, but I shall not take rebirth in Tibet. Anyway, that's a little bit about Mipam Rinpoche, to show what an extraordinary person he was. Absolutely, wonderfully extraordinary. Now, the text he wrote on Abhidharma, the Khenjuk, is in 3 parts. 10 chapters of wisdom, and then about the 4 Vidyas, the 4 wisdoms, and then about the 4 seals of Dharma. The first part is the big bit about the 10 chapters of Abhidharma wisdom. And he wrote that in Trangu Monastery. You know, Trangu Rinpoche, one of our great living teachers. And so, Trangu Rinpoche taught me Abhidharma. These teachings I'm sharing with you come from Trangu Rinpoche. Trangu Rinpoche said, I'm so fortunate with these teachings because I have such a close link with Mipam Rinpoche. He's my spiritual grandfather. So these Khenjuk teachings, Trangu Rinpoche got from Shechen Kontrol. Shechen Kontrol was Akron Rinpoche's guru, Trungpa Rinpoche's guru as well. Trangu Rinpoche got these Khenjuk teachings from him extensively, and Shechen Kontrol had them directly from Mipam Rinpoche. So just now, so that means Mipam Rinpoche in this text was my spiritual great-grandfather. So now he's your spiritual great-great-grandfather, and you have a close connection. And he wrote these first 10 chapters in Trangu Gompa. So somehow there's a very, very nice connection there. So now we look at the text itself, having looked at the context, Abhidharma, and having looked at the author a little bit, Mipam Rinpoche. And I hope you do check out the link on Wikipedia. So the text itself is in 3 parts. We call it good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end. Or in English, introduction, main text, conclusion. So the introduction is very brief. It's the title and a few words. And then there's the main body of the text. And then at the end, there's a dedication, conclusion. So part 1, if you're looking at the text, is called the initial virtue, the good beginning, and it's the introduction. And we look at the title. Now, sometimes when we study a text, our teachers often spend a lot of time on the title. There was a convention that the title should be worded in such a way that a scholar, just by looking at it, knows what it's about. It should have keywords that really give you all the clues you need so you know what that text is about. It's not just a nice title. So the text is called Kepisula Jukpi, Go Shechawe Tenche Shukso, or the treatise. So the first bit of the title is that it's a treatise or a shastra. It's not the Buddha's own words. It is a presentation of the Buddha's teaching, which is a shastra. So this is a shastra, and its name is the gateway leading to the ways of the wise. And so the ways of the wise. Now the wise is a code word in texts. The wise means bodhisattvas in the 10 Mahabodhisattva levels. Not just anybody who's wise. Wise humans don't qualify, ordinary humans. The wise means those who've gone beyond the power of karma forever. That's what bodhisattvas in the 10 levels are. They've sorted their karma. They're not subject to it anymore, like Mipam was saying. So the wise, and then the ways of the wise, when it says in Tibetan Sul, means the ways, it means the way they understand things. Why are they wise? Because they have a certain way of knowing, of seeing, of analyzing, of understanding. So if we want to do the same, if we want to go that way, we need a doorway. Different doorways lead to different places. What is our doorway to the mindset of the great bodhisattvas, the way they see things according to the Buddha's teachings of Abhidharma? This is what this text is. It's a doorway, it's a way of entering or penetrating the way the wise understand things. So, because it's based on Abhidharma, and in particular the texts of Vasubandhu and Asanga, then he also puts the title in Sanskrit, although it wasn't written in Sanskrit or translated from Sanskrit, but it's to show a great respect to the origins. It's the author's way of saying, okay, I've written the text, but there's nothing new in here. I'm just telling you the same old story from the Buddha, from the great masters. So it's called Pandit Sayanayam Avatara Mukhanama Shastram. That's the title. And then there's a homage, and he pays homage. He says, I prostrate to the 3 jewels. And so there were conventions in Tibet when you wrote a text. It was actually the law, the imposed law. If a new text was written and accepted, then the homage at the beginning, either to Manjushri or to the 3 jewels or to the Buddha, whatever, had to show what type of a text it was. So here it's a prostration to all 3 jewels, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. And then his own very brief introduction, he says, having penetrated the essence of the 10 topics, one can show beings the meaning of the 4 seals of Dharma, the treasure of integrating with the quintessence of Mawinima, which is one aspect of Manjushri. So it's kind of the master plan of this text. If you really master the 10 topics of Abhidharma, you'll get wise. Wise defined how? You will have the 4 wisdoms. Wisdom in Sanskrit is vidya. Maybe you've seen the word vidyadhara, wisdom holders. So we will acquire the 4 vidyas. If you've got those 4 wisdoms, then you are equipped to explain to others the 4 key seals of Dharma, the very essence, the very heart of Dharma. And whatever you explain from the Buddha's teaching will be sealed with those 4 seals of authenticity about impermanence, about suffering, no self, and so on. So that's the outline of the text. 10 chapters on wisdom, 10 chapters on Abhidharma, then about the 4 vidyas, then about the 4 seals of Dharma. We're mainly looking at the Abhidharma. So I hope it's so far so good. I don't know how many people are asleep, but there we've finished his good beginning, the introduction. So next we have the good middle, the actual treatise, the Shastra itself. We get a list of the topics, so let's just go through them, and we'll be doing them one by one. The aggregates, the elements, the gateways of perception, interdependence, the appropriate and the inappropriate, faculties, time, the truths, must have been autocorrect. It says the yanks, the yanas. I should say the yanas, not the yanks. That's funny. Yes, the yanas. And I only just noticed that. The composite and the non-composite. So they're the 10 topics. We'll do, I don't know how much this summer, but we're going to start anyway. And then Mipam says, power, I mean, it really is a power, the ability of establishing these 10. Establishing means proving, actually. It means we study until we get to a point where they've proven themselves to us, I suppose is the best way to say it. That's what established means. We'll be able to totally liberate one from the darkness of degenerate philosophies, such as the 10 ideas of ego. And if we can prove these to ourselves, or they prove themselves to us as the truth, then we will have the intelligence of how it is and manyness. This is in the long term, our main guide as teachers. As it isness is Buddha nature, as it really is, as our mind really is, as life really is. Pure, unblemished, unchanging perfection. That's the manyness, and that's the as it isness. The manyness is to know that truth, the Buddha nature, is in every single sentient being. Not just to know that conceptually, but with your heart when you meet any sentient being, any living being, and any human, no matter how evil and nasty, everyone is basically and truly Buddha. Those two knowledges of what Buddha nature is the void, clear nature of mind, and how that's the heart nature of everyone, make a true teacher. This is what he's saying. You'll have the wisdom, the two major wisdoms of as it is and manyness, and then you'll be able to help others. And then this chapter, this isn't from Mipam, this is me, has a structure. This is the actual structure of the chapter. Now, when I used to have to teach this to people going into retreat in Samueling for the first 2, 3, 4-year retreats in Samueling. And so these plans of chapters, some chapters are big. The plan is just an amazing tree. We had them on the wall. It was before the big temple was built. All around the wall were these plans, so we could see where we were in the studies. So anyway, the first chapter that we start today is about the aggregates. There are 5. The aggregate of form, feeling, cognition, of conditioning factors, we'll call them here, but you might know the word samskara, and consciousness. So we're going to study these 5. They are mind and matter. Matter's number 1, form, and the other 4 are mind. So this is our analysis of mind and matter. Our basic language is like when we study anything, you learn the language. If you study chemistry or physics, you'll start to learn a language that other people don't know, and it will get deeper and deeper when you get a master's degree and so on, then the language becomes finer and more precise. So the 5 aggregates are our basic language. Our basic vocabulary is the word I should say, vocabulary that we are using to express ourselves, to understand anything. Now, why are they called aggregates? And in fact, the word in Tibetan is pumpo. Pumpo means heaps. Heaps. It's like piles. So they're called skandha in Sanskrit. Why? Well, let's take one of them, which is consciousness. When we get to consciousness, we'll find that there are 6 basic consciousnesses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touch. Right? If you look at one day, even so far in this talk, each time we see something, that's a seeing moment. How many seeing moments have you had today? How many things have you seen? 1? 100? 1,000? We're getting there now. Every time we hear a sound, whether we recognize it or not, is a moment of hearing consciousness. How many have you had today? Hundreds? Thousands? Every time we have a feeling, pleasant, oh, that's nice. Unpleasant, even mildly unpleasant, mildly pleasant, but there's this kind of reaction, or neutral. How many of those have you had today? And so on. Perception, cognition, how we recognize things. How many things have you recognized today? Bread, toast, coffee, computer. How many things have you recognized? So in a day, thousands, tens of thousands of these consciousness moments with feelings and with form and so on. So each moment is like one. And if we go through the day, we think, oh, that was a form. We put one little marble there. That was a feeling. We put a feeling marble there. And then that was a recognition. We put a recognition marble there. And that was samskara, formation, mental formation. And that was a consciousness. And then we had another feeling, and one to the other. Because we are conscious, we see something, then we don't feel good about it, then we think about it, we recognize it, name it, so on. So it's one. By the end of the day, you've got 5 piles, and each marble in the pile was a moment when something happened. We're looking at the aggregates. The main reason the Buddha taught the aggregates was to help us overcome the illusion of a fixed self, an ego, a fixed identity, by showing how just what happens all day long, moment to moment, one day to the next. There's a this, there's a that, there's a that. There's, by the end of the day, a heap of these, a heap of those. And in there, do you find any constant you? What was your life? So then, if we could only do it, and I suppose by the time artificial intelligence has got into Buddhism in about 20 years' time, it'll do it. We will each have our pile of marbles, and we can meet up at the end of the day, and you can show me your pile of marbles, and I'll show you my pile of marbles. And I can say, what was that marble? And you'll say, oh, that's when I saw Rishi Sunak on the TV. And they'll say, well, what was that marble there? Oh, that's when I heard some Beethoven, and so on. Our piles of marbles will be very different, but we'll all have a big red pile, a big green pile, a big yellow pile, because we've all been perceiving, we've all been conscious, we've all been feeling, we've all recognized different forms, Beethoven, Rishi Sunak, whatever it was. So that's the way that the Buddha shows meditators. You just sit down, you observe everything you are, moment by moment, and we see we are composed. We're like a minestrone soup. I mean, even real minestrone soup in Italy has got bits of vegetables in it, but the one you buy in a packet, which is finely chopped up powder, we're like that, of the aggregates. So, I think I might be about to sneeze. I don't want to scare you. No. So we start with the aggregate of form. Now, these are on a very real and relative level, on a really relative level, relatively real level. When we're not going off here into non-duality and all the rest of it, that comes later. Just now we're sorting out our samsara, we're sorting out our ego delusions. This is very real and very practical. Form is our working material. It's our basic vocabulary. And then all the rest is mind, what we do about form. It's the forms, the people, our mind. You know, it's like a kid with Lego. You've got so many pieces, and you can put them together this way, that way, another way. You can make a bridge, you can make a house, you can make a horse, take it apart, put it together again. You've got the basic forms. And we've got the basic forms that we've acquired since we were born. And now our thinking and our acting is a manipulation of all of those forms. From coming into this world as a screaming "Blah!" with a biological obsession with milk, we've become the grown-up masterminds that here we all are, sitting around, thinking about Buddhist philosophy, and from time to time taking a sip of water. So we're talking about the basic components of everything. We call it form. So we start simply, and then we make it more and more complicated, and we explore form in all of its depths. So the reason, if we go to the text, the reason it's called aggregate is it covers all, the reason it's called the aggregate form, it covers all forms within the three times, past, present, future, whether they're near or far, whether they're good or bad, and so forth. We should know that as far as it being the aggregate of form is concerned, the term aggregate is used to convey the sense of a heap or a pile or of a compilation, a bringing together of many things. When we study form, then form has two main aspects: primary form and secondary form. Primary form is the five elements. Really and truly the four elements, but we include space as well, because those four elements need space. Everything else, all the other forms, are made up from these primary forms: earth, water, fire, wind, not air, wind, and space. Earth, water, fire, wind, and space. Now, what do they mean according to the Buddha's teaching? Earth is the substance that's actually there. Whatever is there, that's there, whatever it is. That's the earth, is the substantial part, substance, with its quality basically of presence, being what it is, being what it is. In the Dharma teachings, we saw 84,000 Dharmas, so many possibilities of being. We saw the word Dharma means each thing holds its own quality. Fire is fire, water is water, and so on. So that being what it is the earth element. The water element is how that being what it is connected and related to something else, which is what it is. The relationship, if there is one. If we look at the whole picture, the entire universe, even indirectly, everything is in the end related, but some things are very immediately related, just like now. Here we've got however many people are watching this. We're all in this same world, 43. We're in this same world of Ken's talk. And we are connected, we are related. And then your mind is relating to my mind through words. As I talk to you, there's an interaction, there's a bonding. Water element is bonding. Bonding, connection. Earth element, the substance that's there. Water element, the connection. which can be very strong, very weak, and so on. If we apply it to physics, then earth element is mass, that's there. And then water element is gravity. Gravity, bonding, attraction. The fire element is the energy that is present, that is present latently in the situation, in the earth element. So you've got latent energy, it's something that's there that could be released. And then you've got energy when it is being released, which is energy as we more normally think about it. Energy. So fire element is energy. So, for instance, it's like the energy, simple example, the energy that's in petrol. Okay, it's latent, it's there. It's only when you put a match to it that it's released and it burns and it makes things warm, or it makes an engine combust, explosion. Latent energy, energy being released, that's the fire element. Wind energy is kinesis, motion, the dynamic aspect. And when you look closely, that means change. Change, dynamic, kinetic. And then space isn't something. Space enables mass to be. If there was no space, mass would be either infinitely big or a tiny infinite point. Space is needed for Earth. Space is needed for connection. Space is needed for the energy to manifest. Space is needed for movement. No space, no movement. Space is the constant backdrop for the four elements. And when we study those elements, they exist everywhere, in matter, in mind, in human situations. Two people come together, two earth elements come together, then there's connection, there's energy in the situation, there's a latent energy, you might choose not to trigger it, or once it's released, then there's energy, karmic situation released, and this makes a dynamic of change which changes the two people's lives. It exists. Primarily, what we're talking about here follows mainly the Abhidharma Kosha, the Shravaka level of Dharma teachings, where there is mind and matter separately, and that these are the basic building blocks of existence. At the time of Buddha already there was what we call atomists, and there was the idea of basic building blocks for everything, and that when we make karma, we actually are programming these basic building blocks to rearrange themselves into our lives and into bodies and into worlds. So anyway, there's the 5 prime elements. They're universal. We're not looking at this particular matter or that matter. We're looking at, there's a substance, there's something substantial there. It's connected and related. And there's energy, and there is movement, dynamics. Then everything else is a result of that on a macro level that we humans experience. So the rest of the language about the secondary elements is about what we perceive. We don't perceive raw energy. We see its manifestation, but we don't perceive energy itself or the form itself in terms of the atoms or subatomic particles, what's really going on down there. We only perceive what these eyes have seen, what these ears have heard, nose has smelt, body has touched, tongue has tasted. That's our vocabulary, acquired since we were born into this human life. Maybe if we were born in some crazy other cosmic world, we'd have very, very different vocabulary. So you can see from the Abhidharma the definitions. Earth element provides foundation and substance. Water element humidifies and binds, connects. Fire element heats and ripens energy. Wind element moves and increases. So then we come to secondary forms, which are the ones we perceive. We're on page 7 now. So there are 11. The first 10 are easy. It's our 5 senses. As we got 5, everyone knows those: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, sensation, physical sensation, touch, nerves. And then the next 5 are easy. They're objects: seeables, hearables, smellables, tastables, touchables. Oh, we did 10 already. Okay, pretty good. And then number 11, well, if we follow the Shravaka text, the Abhidharma Kosha, then they're called unrecognizable forms. And we'll come to those next week. We're almost finished for today. But they're called unrecognizable forms. We'll see why when we get there. If we follow the Mahayana text from Asanga, Abhidharma Samuccaya, then they're called the gateway. And let's learn a new word that I think we'll use because it's more useful to use the Sanskrit. Ayatana. Ayatana. You don't need to turn your microphone on, but say it with me. Ayatana. 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 Ayatana is a gateway of perception, a door of perception. Gateway of perception is an ayatana. So in the Mahayana text, it's called the ayatana of mind's objects, mental objects. It's unrecognizable because whatever your mind is engaging in, other people can't see it. It's your world, and it can't be recognized by others. Like if you're eating an ice cream, then your power to taste can be seen by others, and the ice cream, the object of your taste buds, can be seen by others. It's recognizable. Ken's eating an ice cream. But if Ken is thinking about something, what am I thinking about just now? You can't, can you? But then how much of that goes on in your day? You in your head thinking about things. An awful lot. So number 11's a big deal. But we're going to look at it in quite a specific way, specifically related to commitments and vows, because that's where the powerful side of it comes in. Let's try and do a bit more today. I don't know if you're saturating already. I have no idea. This stuff very familiar to me, but it might be quite new to some anyway. So let's start with the 5 sense faculties. And what we look at, according to the Buddha's teachings, the Abhidharma, is not so much the eye and the ear and the nose and the tongue and the body. But what actually does the work of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling? So here it says the 5 sense faculties. Each one of these organs has its own specific subjective condition for its consciousness to happen. So it says that of the eye is like a sesame flower. So this probably means the rods and the cones at the back of the eye that actually receive the light and transmit it to the brain. So if they are working, or it's their working that makes you see, this is what we're saying here. You can see, but it's not all of the eye that sees. Of course, all of it contributes, but where the seeing actually happens is with what reaches the rods and the cones. So, for instance, you've got cataract, so you've got fuzzy vision or something else. You will see still, you will see fuzzy, you will see wrong, but the seeing is what reaches that bit at the back of the eye, which to the Buddha's vision or to clairvoyant vision is like a sesame flower. It's rather nice. Sesame flower is very pretty. So in the same thing we have in the ear. If you've got the outer ear is not the main thing, it's the hearing mechanism. So we know a lot more now about what's inside, called anvil and stirrup and all those words. And they say there the key part is like the mound on a tree's bark. So some trees have got a growth on them, and it probably means what we call the anvil in the ear, but that's the way it's described in Abhidharma. The point is, that's in modern language, that's what feeds the nerves. It's what happens there, basically, the key thing that feeds the nerves. And then in the nose, it says it looks like very fine copper needles. So clairvoyant vision sees probably the nerves in the nose, or actually in the nose it's not the nerves. Before the nerves, there's the chemical receptors that pick up smells, that then translate chemical transformation into a nervous impulse. So, like you say, seeing clairvoyantly, it's not the whole nose that does the smelling, it's those lines of chemical receptors. On the tongue, it's not the whole tongue, it's part of the tongue. They say it's like a crescent moon. So that's the sensitive part. And then the rest is all over the body. And that's nerves, is nerve endings, basically, nerves. So it says it's, to represent the sensitivity, it says it's like soft skin when touching a bird. So soft skin on your hand, just touching a bird's feathers, it gives us, how can you say, the idea of the sensitivity. And then I wanted to get this far, that is to do the next bit, the next 5, to give you some homework, to explore these next 5. So first one is form. Although we're looking at the aggregate of form in general, here we're looking at form in a more limited sense, which is the object of sight. This is what we actually see is shape and color, full stop. We don't see things. We see shape and color, and afterwards our mind puts those shapes and colors together, and we think we're seeing things. but we're not. A different part of our mind is analyzing. That's another aggregate. This is why we are getting into the details. Our eyes don't see things. Of course they see things in our ordinary language, but what we can actually see is shape and color. And just think of a baby, of a young baby. And they see shapes and colors they have to gradually learn, starting probably with people's eyes, their mother's breast, and so on. It's just shapes and colors, but they gradually learn to put them together to recognize things. So recognition is the third aggregate. We'll come there later on. What the eye can see is only shape and color. Now you can have fun with this over the coming week. Go out or stay indoors and just look at things and try and sort out the difference between seeing things and what your eye is really doing, delineating color and shape. Like if you look at me on your screen, your eyes see where this color and this shape ends, and where all these little colors and shapes of eyebrows begin and end. But you don't actually see eyebrows, you just see colors and shapes. And very often the colors determine the shape. It's because you see that bit's pink, this bit's gray. So it's fun to play around with that. Explore your quality of sight and see what we mean by form as the object of sight, only shapes and colors, not things, shapes and colors. And then the object of our, we're not going to be able to do all of this. We need to explore color and shape a bit more, but well, maybe we don't. It's straightforward. Color, blue, yellow, white, red, and the other colors, mixed colors, cloudy colors, smoky colors, dusty colors, misty colors, translucent or opaque, light and dark. Those are names. What we do when we explore sight is just not explore. For instance, this is a bit opaque, a crystal. Without and this one's quite interesting because half of it's almost transparent and half of it's opaque. So the thing is, when you do your homework, to look at it without the idea of translucent and opaque, but just see what your eye is doing when you look from one bit of it to another bit of it. And how the eye sees a difference before the mind defines a difference. I think we should stop it there, otherwise we get too long today. We can carry on with this, but with your 5 senses, try to explore hearing. Like my clock's just making a noise, but stop now. Explore sound before you put a label on it, just to know what your ears hear. And if you want real fun, you might record 2 messages to yourself. One says, "Ken, you're such a nice person. I'm really glad I know you." And the other one says, "Ken, you're one of the worst creeps I've ever met. You disgust me." Something like that. You try and just listen to the sound. As though it were in Chinese or Tibetan. Then whether somebody's telling you, they can be smiling in your face and telling you you're a creep. And if you don't understand Chinese, it's just sound. What is sound before it's recognized, before it's labeled? That's what we're looking at in this aggregate of form. What is taste before it's nice? Before it's spinach or burnt, cooked, whatever. Just the taste. Just the smell. And then in our body, hunger, satiation, cold, heat, thirst, ache, pain, bliss. Those are all labels to try and explore the body before we are reacting and defining, just body experience through the nerve endings. A little bit of homework, and we'll stop there, because with a topic like this, then there could well be questions and discussion afterwards. So let's dedicate what was ever good, and we'll pick it up next week and carry on. May whatever virtue was created by this session contribute to the state of omniscience being attained, through the main enemy, mind's defilements, being completely defeated. Through that, may each and every sentient being become freed from the ocean of existence, troubled by the waves of rebirth, aging, sickness, and death. May this precious bodhicitta arise in those in whom it's not arisen. May its development know no setbacks. May it increase ever more and more. Through this virtue, may we quickly achieve Mahamudra and establish every single sentient being in that same accomplishment. Okay, so that's us launched. A lot of today was background and introduction, but I'm glad we got into some of the, how can you say, substance of the topic. And so if you've got anything you'd like to contribute, or to a question you'd like to ask, then now's our time together.
Yeah, and I've just got, it's an observation from my own experience from, well, actually quite a few times, but I suppose the easiest one to think about is sensations of pain. A few years back, I woke up in the night with a really kind of painful ear infection, and I couldn't sleep. And so I just decided to sit and do some meditation and just observe the sensations, because it was really nagging away. And instead of holding on to a label of this is pain, this is uncomfortable, I'm tired, I want to go to sleep, I just tried to focus my mind on really observing the nature of the sensation. And the more I looked at it, the easier it became just to sit with it, and noticing that it didn't stay the same. From one second to the next, it was shifting all the time. And that actually made it much easier to relax into it and just see it as, and just experience it as just sensations, without putting a label and a judgment on it so easily. And after about 10 minutes of that, I was able to go to sleep, and actually had quite a good sleep. And I've tried to apply that in a few other situations for lots of practical reasons, like things like cold water and stuff like that. And it takes an effort to do, but it's proved really, really useful, just that kind of examination. So I don't know if that helps anybody else. But.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's part of our practice in terms of different practices we can do in Mahamudra, Dzogchen, and just here in this course, the main thing, so that we can speak more and more meaningfully and precisely about ourselves. I mean, not just here, but when excuse me, you're talking with a meditation teacher or in general in Dharma context, is to give us a precise language. And there it's to know just what form is. So there are many, many useful applications, but here, in terms of study, we want to understand form as our five sense faculties, and which is, I mean, it's an amazing thing. Very late in life, you can suddenly discover it's like a fresh who and what you are, with this blob of stuff going around, tasting, seeing, hearing, smelling, and reacting in certain ways and making our life choices because of it. So to isolate out the five senses and their objects, first thing, very clearly, that gives us a much better tool than to go back to our childhood, our programming, our conditioning, our upbringing, to see how all of that evolved, was used, was misused, and so on. That's the main point here. Yeah. Thank you.
And first of all, apologies for joining late. Can I just, I've been taught for most of my Buddhist time in the Theravada tradition. And I'm trying to put this in the context of previous teaching in that tradition. And as I understand this, once our five senses make contact with an object, so we see shape and we see color, beyond that, everything else that our mind interprets from that is learnt convention. In other words, we only know red is red because we've been taught red is red. If from childhood we'd been taught red was blue, we would interpret that as blue, and so on. And so everything our mind interprets from a situation we're in arises from a lifetime of learnt conventions around the labels we put on things. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's pretty correct. I think it's a like in the title of this text, a doorway. It's a doorway into an area of exploration that we do in meditation very practically, and that in itself raises interesting questions, like, for instance, animals that, as far as we know, don't have the language, like we have it at least, but then whether we call it red or blue, they, by whatever it is, by the nature of that object and its vibrations, its resonance in their world, they're going to avoid it or eat it or whatever because it might poison them or it might be good food and so on. So there's a recognition, sure, but form is different from the other four aggregates because they are all, you use the word convention, I think convention, they're all mental. If we make a difference between mind and matter, or mental and material, that's where the Mahayana one uses the same language because it's very practical. We're seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, all the rest. So, but in terms of the philosophy that's behind it, it's not that there is a separate matter or separate form, and that in fact what presents to our mind as the basis for what is mental is in fact in itself mental and programmed by our past karma. So that what for us humans is water, for a fish is environment, devas is nectar, and for spirits it's like poisonous acid or something, the feeling. That's a direct a not common experience. It's not a common experience, it's an individual karmic experience, which means there isn't a kind of a fixed matter. That's, but then that takes us deep. I mean, that takes us into philosophers and endless speculation, and pick your favorite one. But it's interesting speculation. And what's brilliant about the aggregates is we're dealing very practical, hands-on stuff, and especially the main point is to realize our impermanent multiplicity, interdependence, as opposed to a fixed, not just a fixed self, but fixed realities, which are much less fixed once we break them down into their components. Anyway, nice to see you, David. That's been a long while.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Ken.
I know.
You mentioned that artificial intelligence might get to grips with Buddhism in about 20 years. And personally, I'm hoping to avoid artificial intelligence for the rest of this particular lifetime. But my question is, do you think, well, every technology has or potentially has a good side and a bad side, as we have learned to our cost. Do you think artificial intelligence could actually be quite helpful in getting people to understand that they, to put it in a nutshell, don't exist as an I, but rather are all these series of aggregates from moment to moment? Do you think AI could actually be useful in determining these piles of moments?
Well, I'll certainly be long gone before any of that is possible, if it is. But I did some research. I was part of some research. I spent a week inside scanners where they were looking at my brain, basically doing different things. I had to practice shamatha, practice compassion, different things like this, so that they could compare it with people who'd not meditated. They needed people who'd done more than, I forget what it was, 20,000 hours of meditation in their life or something like that. And so they were comparing meditators' brains with non-meditators' brains. So you can see how, they would say, like now, they showed you images, horrible images, actually, suffering. And they asked you to not feel compassion, to try and just look at the images, and then to feel as much compassion as you could, which means that they were identifying the bits of the brain that fire when you do that. And so I would imagine that in time, they would be able to wire people up to see which of the 5 aggregates is happening. And you would be able to print out, like millions of colored dots or something on a timeline through the day, and people could be mind boggled. There'd be an app for that, for Buddhists, but and it might happen. I mean, that's beyond, it's just speculation, but I don't like it for 2 reasons. One is I think we should be doing that work with our mind, because this is the basis of mindfulness, and it's developing our own mindfulness rather than a smart computer's mindfulness, that we get the benefits, so that we become more and more accurately, more and more lucidly aware of what's going on in our mind. And it's only through developing mindfulness that it goes into layers, that we can see not just what's happening now in the mind, but there's the background layers of motivation, conditioning, reactivity, and so on. They're quite subtle. So a machine is not going to get those. And the only reason we can get liberated, you can't take a machine into the bardo. You can't take a machine onto your meditation cushion to get enlightened for you. It needs to be through the power and freedom of your own mind. So I wouldn't like that app. It might be a curious game to play from time to time. You know, if you're running a Dharma course, just to put everyone through it for an hour to see what happened and then leave it. But the main reason I don't like it is because nearly anything that we do with technology or with science, as you rightly say, can be misused. And once the scientists get inside our head, which they already are in many ways, but once that gets more intense, then I just don't bear to think about it. At least that's one area of privacy we have now.
Yeah, okay, thank you. When we meet next time, I'll ask you, how's your AI app going, Ken?
Yes. No, I don't want to know. I've got the excuse of old age. Too old for that rubbish. I mean, it's like I was saying, and I mean, there's something to be said. Like I was saying, with the early centuries of Buddha Dharma, which are often called the golden centuries after the Buddha's teaching, the time when the teachings were so pure and there were so many people gained liberation, arhat, and so on. They seemed to do very well without complex Abhidharma in those centuries. With Vinaya, with Sutra, with meditation and right conduct, they achieved wonderful things. And scholarity also became quite a big detour in Buddhist terms. I think that's carried on up to our present day. I don't know. Yeah.
No, I was talking about when we meet in our next lives. We will grow up with AI technology as being the norm, I think, unfortunately.
Well, next life's not necessarily here. Buddha taught about many different worlds and many different realities. It's like that prediction from Mipam Rinpoche, sets you thinking. Okay, is that us finished for today, or more question, more discussion? So hello and goodbye to all of those I didn't greet at the beginning. Great to see you, and wish you all a very, very good week. We did the dedication, so see many of you next Saturday. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now. Thanks, Ken. Ciao, everyone.